Good afternoon. I'm Abby Wolf, the Executive Director of the Hutchins Center, and on behalf of Professor Gates and all of us here, it's a pleasure to welcome you to a conversation between two of the most brilliant and thoughtful writers at work today, Honorée Jeffers and Tracy K. Smith. I will happily take my privilege of saying a few words about both of them in a moment, but first let me tend to a couple of housekeeping details. As you've become accustomed to doing, please put your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and the Q&A will follow a reading by Professor Jeffers and then a conversation between her and Professor Smith. But keep your questions coming throughout as they occur to you. And also, we will have a link in the chat where you can purchase Professor Jeffers' book. And now a few words of introduction. Honorée Jeffers grew up in Durham, North Carolina, where I went to college, and Atlanta, Georgia. Her work examines culture, religion, race, family, and with honesty and precision, place and history, what Alice Walker has called a definite landscape on which to ponder, admire, and explore, which is a phrase that I love. Her first book, The Gospel of Barbecue, was selected by none other than Lucille Clifton for the Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize and was a 2001 Patterson Poetry Prize finalist. Her subsequent collections include The Age of Phyllis, The Glory Gets Out, Red Clay Sweet, which received second prize in the Crab Orchard Review's open competition, and Outlandish Blues. Jeffers' work has been anthologized in numerous volumes, and she has published fiction in the Indiana Review, the Kenyon Review, the New England Review, and Story Quarterly. She is the recipient of many, many prizes, including the winner of the 2021 Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize of the Academy of American Poets. The book we're going to hear from today, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, was a 2021 Kirkus, a finalist for the 2021 Kirkus Prize in Fiction. It was longlisted for the 2021 First Novel Prize from the Center of Fiction. It was the winner of the 2021 NAACP Image, she was the winner of a 2021 NAACP Image Award for Poetry, an inductee in 2020 to the Alabama Writers Hall of Fame, and longlisted in 2020 for the National Book Award in Poetry. And there are many others, but you can read about them elsewhere. I will say one thing that I found particularly interesting in her bio was that she was elected into the American Antiquarian Society in recognition of her deep scholarly research, which we see coursing through both her poetry and her prose. And of course, this novel we're about to hear from today is a beautiful exemplar of that kind of research and creatively rendered. Jeffers earned an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alabama, and she currently teaches creative writing and literature at the University of Oklahoma, where she is an associate professor of English. Tracy K. Smith is professor of English and of African and African American Studies, and the Susan S. and Kenneth L. Wallach Professor at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. She is the author of 5 books of poetry and 1 memoir, and earned her BA at Harvard and her MFA at Columbia. And she was my student long, long ago when she was in the English department as an undergrad. Smith, it's well known, served as the Poet Laureate of the United States for 2 terms from 2017 to 2019. During that time, she edited the anthology American Journal, 50 Poems for Our Time, and launched the America Public Media podcast, The Slowdown. She took very seriously the Poet Laureate's mandate to make poetry accessible to the public and to open it up to new audiences. And she seems to have been quite successful in that. Her 5 books of poetry and 1 memoir have earned numerous accolades. Smith's debut collection, The Body's Question, was selected by Kevin Young as winner of the Cave Canem Prize for the best first book by an African-American poet. Her second book, Duende, received the James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets, and I believe an Essence Book Award as well. Her third book, most notably, called Life on Mars, received the 2012 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. and it made the best of list from many of our most notable publications. Her fourth book of poems, called Wade in the Water, won the Anisfield Wolf Book Award for its probing of American history. And in her memoir, Ordinary Light, Smith explores her own experience of race, religion, and the death of her mother shortly after she graduated from Harvard. This book was a finalist for the National Book Award and named a notable book by both the New York Times and Washington Post. She has also co-translated a book of Chinese poetry by the poet Yi Lei, and she has co-edited the prose anthology, There's a Revolution Outside My Love, Letters from a Crisis. And last year, she was also voted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She is not one to be siloed in a particular genre, and she wrote the libretto for an opera titled Castor and Patience, a collaboration with composer Gregory Spears, and it will premiere after a pandemic delay this summer at the 2022 Summer Festival of the Cincinnati Opera. As I mentioned, Professor Jeffers will do a brief reading from the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which is remarkably her first novel. Sets the bar kind of high for many people, I think. She'll then engage in conversation with Professor Smith, and then we will move on to your questions. For right now, please join me in welcoming Honorée Fanonne Jeffers and Tracy K. Smith to the Hutchins Center this afternoon. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. Before I begin, I would like first to thank Dr. Gates for inviting me to be present here, and for Professor Smith for graciously giving her time to be in conversation with me. These are two people that I've admired for years, so it's just truly an honor to be here. In addition, I'd like to acknowledge that I am living in a town, Norman, Oklahoma, established on land that was the traditional home of the Caddo Nation and Wichita and affiliated tribes. Though promised to the Muskogee and Seminole peoples after their first forced removal from the southeastern United States in the 1830s, of course, this land also was stolen from those indigenous peoples. In 2020, the McGirt v. Oklahoma U.S. Supreme Court decision established that the Muskogee Reservation in Oklahoma had never been dissolved by Congress, and thus about half of the state is currently part of this reservation. Although my town is labeled as unassigned tribal land, still I consider my home to be part of Muskogee lands. My sixth book and first novel, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and I hope it's all right to say that it, a few weeks ago, just won the 2022 National Book Critics Circle Award. Also, I hope it's all right to say I am a full professor at University of Oklahoma, the first Black full professor in the history of the English department, and now the first Black distinguished chair. I hold the Paul and Carol Dobbs Sutton Chair in English. My novel is a family saga, a Black feminist kitchen table epic, and the history of a place told through the voices of Indigenous, African, and European peoples. The novel is framed as a crossroads narrative. One part of this narrative takes place in the 18th and 19th centuries, from the time Oglethorpe settled, some might say invaded, the place now called Georgia, though through the land lotteries of that territory, the continued theft of indigenous lands to make room for short staple cotton farmed by African peoples stolen from their homelands, and the forced removal of the Muskogee to Oklahoma Territory by white Americans. The other part of this novel follows the coming of age story of Ailey, a young girl whose trials mirror those of her female ancestors. And throughout the words of the great Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, the great American intellectual of the 19th and 20th centuries, guides the story, providing the foundations for community building and historical clarity. His words are the notes to the songs of the Black South and our nation writ large. I'm going to read a short passage from Love Songs, and then I'm going to read a poem, a new poem, because Professor Smith asked me to. And she's so wonderful, so I cannot say no. This is from one of the songs, and this is called The Loss of Africa. We know of those taken from the place called Africa, captured by men who had transgressed against flesh for a long time. The Africans who stole others and kept those folks for themselves. The Africans who stole others and sold those to the Europeans who would take them over the water and humiliate and sometimes torture them for life. We know about the dark, dark folks who never would see home again. We know dates, we know hours, we know disbelief, we know mourning. We know about the years even before 1619 and the years that would come after. We know about those Africans who arrived in a place that the English call Jamestown, Virginia. We know which villages these Africans lived in before they were stolen, their collection of conical huddled homes. Domestic birds running on the ground of a courtyard, feathers of black and red, a goat tied to the side of a hut, and every morning a mother rising from her pallet, tossing grains in a pestle. And we try not to weep over what was lost to these folks. We know about an enemy from a neighboring village. We know of strangers who saw wealth in meat, rocking bone. The names of the captives are lost to everyone but us, their tribes, their children if they had them, their beloveds they'd hoped to marry in ceremonies of laughter and wine, the rivers passing through their nations, their words for a rooster cock crowing, for a delectable fruit, skin the color of red, intruding yellow, for their warbles and ticks of joy. On that English ship that would land in Jamestown, the enslaved probably weren't locked in irons. That time would come later, after the sailors saw the Africans look at water and sing, leap overboard, and the sharks swim to meet them. These 20 and odd folks would begin as bloody vectors spilling lines across continents. More Africans enslaved by the English would arrive on ships. You already know that we know laws as well. We know 1662 and the words set down in the Virginia colony, partis, sequitur, ventrum, Latin for that which is brought forth from the belly. And so African, now Negro, women's children would no longer follow the status of their fathers as had been English common law for centuries. With dark children, their mothers would decide their fate. If a woman was enslaved, her children would be enslaved. If a woman was free, her children would be free. And if enslaved somehow, a mother would try to hold on to her child, to keep her child from being sold. And if separated, her child would forever grieve. And the one poem that I'm going to read, I wrote during the early part of the pandemic when I saw all the young folks out on the streets protesting, and I'm an older person, I'm in my 50s and somewhat of a coward. And so I wanted to honor these young people who were putting their bodies on the line for us to make this country a better place. This is called Sila, and this is after Margaret Walker's For My People. The Lord clings to my hands after a night of shouting. The Lord stands on my roof and sleeps in my bed, sings the darkened Egun tunnel, cooks my food in abundance, though I was once foolish and wished for an emptied stomach. The Lord drapes me with rolls of fat and plaits my hair with sanity, gives me air, music from unremembered fever, this air. Oh, that I may give air to my people. Oh, interruption of murder, the welcome Selah. The Lord is a green Tubman escape, a street buzzing with concern, minds discarding answers, Black feet on a centuries-long journey. The Lord is the dead one scratching my face, pinching me in dreams, the screaming of the little girl that I was, the rocking of the little girl that I was, the sweet hush of her healing, her syllables skipping on homesick pink. I pray to my God of confused love, a toe touching blood and swimming through Moses' water, a cloth and wise rocking an eventual Passover, outlined skeletons will sing this day of air for my people. Oh, the roar of God, oh, our prophesied walking. And now I am very happy to be in conversation with the great Tracy K. Smith.
Oh, Honorée, thank you. I think I unmuted myself before you stopped, and you might have heard me say, just testifying here in my office. Thank you for being here with us today. And thank you for the immensity of your voice and your conscience and your intelligence and the spirit that you carry with and in you, because the work that you're putting into the world, it reminds us of what we're connected to and also what we're responsible for, you know, in these ways that are incredibly moving. And we found as humans in the 21st century ways to avoid some of the hard aspects of that connection or those connections. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for your kindness. You have always been kind. And to me, you were kind to me when my credit rating was like a blood pressure readout, and you were kind to me now. And that means a lot, because, you know, the sort of continuation of kindness, and not simply people saying, oh, okay, well, you know, now you're worthy. You have always been just a wonderful person. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. I love the two pieces that you shared, because I think that they, in their different ways, alert us to the large we that lives in the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, the ancestral we, the stewards, the original stewards of the land. There's this large I that we follow as well, which is Ailey and the people that she descends from and that hold her up. The land has a voice in this. You also bear courageous witness to a they, which are, you know, the European, let's say, invaders of this land. And what all of that reveals to me also is this large national us that it's brought, you know, it's all epic, the poems and the fiction. And what I want to start by asking you particularly about the novel is how you arrived at the sense of architecture, because it's a pretty intricate architecture that's capable of sustaining all of that.
Well, you know, I've said this before. This book was supposed to be a beach read. And my agent, who I adore, and we've been together for 17 years now, Sarah Burns, found me when I was writing short stories. And what was really interesting was, you know, when I was writing the voice that I wrote, that comes out a lot, the vernacular, the working class voice. A lot of people were, as the kids can say, they just weren't feeling me, but the story that she really connected to was a short story in all vernacular.
Mhm.
And I was kind of shocked by that. And so when we got together, all I wanted to do was write short stories. And she's just, she's a wonderful woman, very kind and warm, but also just straight no chaser. And she's like 5'1", and I'm a tall one. I'm like 5'8.5", So she said, there's no money in stories. And so, she said, you can write the stories if you want to, but there's no money in stories. And I really, really liked her. There was something in my spirit that instantly connected to her. This was back when I would sort of feel embarrassed or ashamed about listening to my spirit. Now, that's it. I listen. Of course, I'm a deep intellectual, but I think being out here among Native American peoples and seeing colleagues of mine who can hold, very hardcore intellectual ways of being alongside spirit really helped me to claim that. So run along, I would send her little passages trying to trick her into thinking I was, writing a novel, and she would say, this is beautiful, but there's no structure. Then where's this going? So I hunkered down, and the first sort of feeling that I was, okay, I'm going to write a novel was Ailey, was the protagonist of the book. And so it was just supposed to be a coming of age story, again, a beach read. The other thing that happens, and I don't know if you're like this too, is I'm usually working on different projects at the same time. And then whatever starts speaking to me the most, I keep on going. So at the same time, I was working on The Age of Phyllis. Even before The Age of Phyllis, I was working on The Glory Gets. So I had, all kinds of stuff that I was doing. And with poetry, it's just kind of like, I write the poems, and then right around maybe halfway, something starts speaking to me. Well, when you're talking about a novel, that's a lot but I didn't really know, so I'm writing this Ailey coming of age beach read. And then all of a sudden I start having these dreams. I've spoken about this before. And people would come to me in the dreams. I haven't spoken as much about the fact that I come from a line of visioning women. And my great-grandmother was a root worker. And so, but being someone who really wanted to be, again, a hardcore intellectual, a hardcore academic, I didn't talk a lot about visions. Miss Lucille Clifton was the person that I could connect to because she was so brilliant and I just admired her so much. I couldn't look down on her or feel embarrassed about her visions the way that I still was in the early aughts about my family. And that's also because, I'd had people ridicule my thick Southern accent and, sort of say, in some ways overtly, in other ways not overtly, you're not very smart. So I would get up from these dreams, from these visioning dreams, and it was just like so easy, but I'm like fighting for the contemporary story. And so this went on for about a year or 18 months. And then something sort of clicked with the Ailey story, and I realized she was somehow going to be connected with it. Her story was going to be connected with the ancestral story. This was very early on, you know. I think it was right when, you know, I was married for about 5 minutes. It was right when I was married, and I was married to a West African man, and he was from Senegal. So when you see the, you know, the Wolof and all of that, you know, and I've studied Wolof, you know, I have Tuti Wolof, little bit of Wolof. So I began to look at the structure, and that it became very difficult. It was very difficult for about 3 years. And then I just started trying to weave things together, and it was a hot mess. And it was a hot mess. But the work that I did on the Age of Phyllis, the archival work, really helped me with love songs. And so I realized that I needed some kind of structure. And I was rereading the you know, David Levering Lewis's brilliant 2-volume biography of Dr. Du Bois. And there was something about his words and his love for Southern Black people, and Ailey's love. Ailey first is embarrassed, and then she, you know, and then she begins to understand the profundity of these working class, you know, Black folks in the South. And so that's when it started coming together, but it was not meant to be 800 pages.
I'm glad it is. I feel like I could read that book forever.
You're so sweet.
I know I'm not alone either.
It's going to be a white elephant. I was like, nobody's going to read this book, but you know, I've been blessed.
Well, you know, the journey that you describe between feeling like these parts of yourself had to be sort of sequestered from one another, or maybe dampered a little bit. I think that's familiar to many of us. Yes. And something is really exciting about the way that the archive becomes a site of, you know, opening those things up and showing how they call to one another. I mean, the fact is that the spiritual dimension, the more psychic and moral dimensions that are aligned with the ancestral in this book, and maybe just in general, oftentimes we believe or allow ourselves to believe that they are silence, right? Because in the archive, those are the regions of silence that we come upon. And so it's exciting to see you find a way to draw that up, to trust it, and to allow it to shed such powerful light on the fact, the logic, the argument that we connect to intellect. You know, that is also a huge part of the book. I'd love to know, has your relationship with the archive evolved? I know that you're a scholar and an artist. Did the Age of Phyllis change your relationship to the archive, or could you talk a little bit about that?
The first time I went, it's so funny. This book has really connected me with many people that I admire, and one in particular, and this is going to connect me to the archives, is the scholar Jennifer L. Morgan. We actually were in a class together in spring of 1990. And when she wrote me, and, you know, and I admire her so much. You know, I'm a Jennifer L. Morgan stan. Everybody knows that. And I said to her, you may not remember, but we were in a class. Dr. Joseph E. Harris of Howard University had a visiting appointment at UNC Chapel Hill. And I took the class because I knew I wasn't coming back to UNC Chapel Hill. I was failing. I was in a master's of journalism program, and I knew that this wasn't the kind of writing that I wanted to do. And he sent us into the archives. Mm. And I remember when I wrote her back, and she said, I knew you, right? I knew you. And I don't feel there are any accidents. And so I went into the archives, and there were all of these, this is in 1990, back when dinosaurs walked the earth, as I always say to my students. And there were these portfolios that no one had opened, okay? And in the portfolios were letters from enslaved Black people writing to their masters. I made copies of many of them, I still have them. And that was my first, that was my introduction to the archives. But as the years have progressed, there's a feeling that I get when I'm encountering these Black folks. And there are so many, as you said, so many silences. And for me, I know that these people they loved their children, they loved each other. They had hopes and they had dreams, and I feel a way about them as if they are family members many times. And that's how I was able to sort of craft that in love songs. And in the age of Phyllis, I think as a Black woman, there have been so many great scholars, Dr. Gates is, The Trials of Phyllis Wheatley was really what propelled me into that 15-year journey writing about her. So there have been, Vincent Coretta, Catherine Clay Bassard. There have been many wonderful scholars, but I think being a Black female poet, there was a way that I connected to her. And so whenever I'm in the archives, it's not even like I'm saying, what do I want to do? It speaks to me.
Yeah.
And then that's when the real work begins. Mm-hmm. They speak, and then I began trying to place flesh on the bones of the story. And it can be incredibly painful. You know what I'm talking about. I remember when I was writing The Age of Phyllis, I have a very teeny Facebook, there are students here, and the young folks don't do Facebook anymore unless they're trying to keep in touch with their grandparents or something like that, right? But I would come up on Facebook, and I have a very small Facebook group, and I would ask for prayer. Mm-hmm. Or if people did not believe in God, good thoughts, because so much of it, just like those, I think there's 6 poems in The Age of Phyllis about the transatlantic slave trade. Mm-hmm. Just those took me maybe 2 years, and I would wake up with screaming fits, and it was harrowing. Mm-hmm. But I felt like it was not just a responsibility. I really truly felt called. And I think there are scholars who are called. I think that we're all sort of doing this work in different ways. And what I've been really happy to see is, I don't take credit for this, but I will say in the aftermath of The Age of Phyllis and now Love Songs, there are more people saying, okay, yes, this is the work that I do, with no apology. Yeah. Because I think, people were like, why do you always want to write about the past? And I'm just like, well, here we are. Mm-hmm. Here we are,
You're reminding me of the moments in Love Songs where Ailey is emerging from the archive or from sites of trauma, historic trauma, and her advisor says, you must bathe you must pray, you must put on light colored clothing. And it's also reminding me of something that Douglas Kearney, the poet, said recently when he visited my class here. He said, you know, I'm summoning all of this. Much of it is heavy and dark, and I need it to be in this space. This isn't a performance, this is a conjuring. And I'm asking us to be in the presence of this that is real and that is not gone. And it feels like, you know, that's a large enough frame for what I believe is this large work that is, you know, all those things you said. It's intellectual, but it's also largely spiritual. You know, we live with spirit.
It is. And the other thing is that, and this may sound kind of woo-woo, but it's interesting to me to see, you know, everybody doesn't have to be this way and everybody isn't this way, but to see many of us African Americans in particular who sort of come from shaman stock. You know, there's that sort of, you start talking to people and they will say, my grandmother, my grandfather, my mama, my auntie, you know, did X, Y, and Z. They were in the community, or they were church mothers, or they were, you know. And so I do think that, you know, when we look at, you know, I think griot is sometimes overused, right? Or griot, which is the feminine version. But I do think that when you look at West African lineage, and that you have people who are artisans who come from 7, 8, 9, 10 generations of artisans, or griots or griots, and they come from that. And so I do think that there is a way that we can, and I don't think it should be any weirder than or stranger than people saying that they're Christian. You know, if we can hold a space, which I always tell people I'm a pro LGBTQ, a radical Black feminist Christian, and that's like an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp. There are maybe 10 of us, right? But if I can hold a space for a Christian way of looking at things, why can't I hold a space for a non-Western, non-Christian way of looking at things? Because, you know, as the old song says, it ain't but the one, you know. So it's all connected. And even for people who don't have a faith system, I believe there is a spirituality of atheists, because it's really all about putting good in the world. And if you're trying to live a good life, it doesn't matter if you believe in a higher power. If you're putting that out there, that too, I believe, is a form of spirituality.
Maybe while I still have a few minutes with you before we open it up, I want to ask you about the other side of that, because you go back to history and you dig into what is monstrous and unspeakable. And you highlight in many ways the ways that the grievances of England's most disenfranchised people who came to the US, sometimes as, you know, an alternative to death sentences, as you were, you know, one of the characters, Gideon Franklin, perpetuated against the Native Americans the very same, you know, acts that they were recoiling from. What I see in that dimension of the book is that in many ways, becoming a white person in the New World was a kind of social arrival or reversal of fortune. And so it allowed anything to be tolerated, right? Because it facilitated this status. And there's a weight, I imagine, to investing in those characters as well.
Oh yes. And I think but it's odd, because, you know, the most monstrous character, as we know, is Samuel Pinchard. And when my editor, Aaron Wicks, who is now a very dear friend, said to me, we need to know how he became this way.
Yeah.
I was terrified because I didn't want to go to that space. I had already gone to, and sometimes, and they mean well, people, Bookstagrammers will talk about my book on Instagram, and they have this whole long list of triggers. There's this, there's this, there's this.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I just delete because, my thing is, this is how this country is formed. And so if you want to know about American history, then that is triggering. There's no way around it. So all of this wonderful, sweeping, glorious rhetoric is great, but when you pull back, you see the maggots, digging, And so my biggest fear was that the love and tenderness that I showed a young Samuel would be looked at as a justification for who he became. And so just those, I think it's like 15 pages or whatever, took me like 6 months or something like that, because I really wanted to show the balance. And the other thing is, for most of us who are African-American descendant from the transatlantic slave trade, from the Middle Passage, we have white ancestry. And so we have a right to speak about our ancestors, even if we may, I know a lot of Black people are very uncomfortable saying I'm a multiracial person or I have, white ancestry, right? It's just basically like that's over there. And so one of the things that I was doing is bringing those 3 communities together to talk about how you have to, all of us, I say this to my students when they're grappling with very difficult things, all of us have a road within that can go left or can go right. We all must be vigilant to make sure. I do not believe people are born evil. And there, I think that's a cop-out, so that we can look at other people and their horrible behavior and say, oh, no, I could never do that. And so one of the things, and this is how I started getting these gray hairs, is that you look at it and you start from the beginning and you see the choices, and then there's a choice that's made. And then that choice leads you this place. And then that choice leads you another place. And then here you are. Here is America, And so when I talk to Black folks, when I have like a little book club called the Nerdy Circle, and we deal with like really hardcore nerdy. We're reading the critical race selections from critical race theory. And sometimes Black folks will get on there and they'll be like, white folks slow down and blah. And I'm like, hey, we're not here to trauma bond. Okay. We're here to look at how this work is showing us what came before and a path forward. And so, but I think that many people don't like nuance, and that's why the artists are here.
Yeah.
We're here to look to come very close, and to talk about those little teeny things instead of the big picture, because there is no big picture. There is no big picture. And so, yeah, that's, that's how that works.
Well, it's amazing because you're right. It leads to a greater kind of courage or capacity to say, okay, now what do we do?
Now what do we do?
Choices,
it's scary though.
See the path, but the story's not over, right?
The story's not over. And I mean, I was recently asked, I won't say where, how do we heal racism in America? And I said, that's above my pay grade. And that was edited out. But no, it wasn't with Miss Oprah. But I wouldn't have brought it up if it was with Miss Oprah. It was someplace else. And I thought, because people want a very easy way forward, but there is no easy way forward except leading with humanity. If you lead with humanity, that will hopefully, and that doesn't mean you won't do some janky stuff, but that will hopefully allow you to lead, to go forward better. So that's what
I want to keep talking to you, but I know there's some brilliant questions in the Q&A. So I'll see if Abby wants to come back and shepherd that part of the program. But thank you so much, Honorée.
Thank you, Tracy. It's just been a blessing and a pleasure.
For me too.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to come back, but I think, Tracy, if we may get to some more of your questions. So I will signal you because we want to hear from you too. I do want to point out that Cheryl Townsend-Gilks is in our audience, and she actually submitted a question that connects so beautifully and painfully to what you were just talking about, the kind of making of a monster. And I just wanted to share what she says here. I think you've addressed some of her question, but she brings it into the current day. She says, as I watched the hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and observed the horrible behavior of certain senators, I felt that I was watching monsters at work, and I could not help thinking of this part of your book. And then you've addressed this about how you created this part of the book and what the psychic cost of creating that and kind of moving on from that is. But I'm curious about to jump off of that question a little bit. I think you just said there's, we have to peel back all of these narratives, and that's what they are. They're narratives that collide with each other, but there's no big picture. I think a lot of people have wanted to see the thankful confirmation of Judge Jackson as part of a big picture, as part of some kind of hopeful narrative that this country still allows for, even with all of the horrors that we saw. So I'm wondering if you can, I don't know if I'm asking you to weigh in.
No. I mean, of course I have.
That.
I've got plenty thoughts on that. I think there is a hopeful narrative. But I think that narrative is more realistically hopeful than it was when President Obama put his hand on that Bible for the first time. I'm from, as we say, I'm from the dirty, I'm from the deep South. And even I was like, okay, this is it. We're done with this. We're moving forward. I was on the phone with my mama. We were crying, just unabashedly. I think in terms of Judge Brown Jackson's confirmation hearings, what we saw is a real commitment to keeping Black people from having a sense of self-esteem. We remember those sage words of the great Toni Morrison when she talked about, if you can only feel tall when someone else is on their knees. And so if we have this woman, this extraordinary woman, and they've done all kinds of background check. Like I was thinking, oh Lord, no way I could pass all of that, right? Ooh, the 80s alone, right? We see this woman and she has leapt through every single hoop, okay? And they are still denigrating her. They are accusing her of lying. They are accusing her. The one that hurt me the most was they're accusing of her of being in league with child predators. That was deeply troubling because she's a mother, so to accuse a mother of something like that. But they had to do that because it wasn't simply politics. There was something, deeply inside of them that they had to say to themselves, this woman who brings, more trial experience than 9 justices combined is still not worthy. And what that means is I'm still great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm still great because I have this phrase that I took out of my novel, and it's deeply problematic, but I'm going to say it. A rat always wants to be better than a roach.
Mm.
Okay. So you have these, I'm not saying anybody's a roach or anybody's a rat, but what it is that no matter what you have come from, and we see this in the novel, that we have these poor white people. And I remember Margaret Walker's Jubilee, where the overseer's wife says, Weans is poor, but thank God Weans is white. Mm-hmm. That's important. Mm-hmm. Because there was an article that I read in the critical race theory reader called Whiteness as Property. So whiteness is really a fungible kind of thing. It's not simply skin color. And so they have to believe that this is important and that Blackness is not a property. Mm-hmm. Blackness means nothing. And then when you put on top of it that Black women really saved this country during the last election, right? How dare we think we're owed something? Mm-hmm. We should just be doing this because, my mammy loved me, right? And so that's what they wanted. And guess what? God and the ancestors were like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I don't know what spirit hit Cory Booker. I didn't even know he could go to church like that. I was like, what's going on with Bruh Cory? I mean, he really got super Black, but it was clear that he felt an emotional investment and a spiritual investment. So that's what there is. But, there's always good white folks, as my grandma used to say, and they were also on our side. And so that's why I continue to have hope, but I'm a lot more realistic these days.
I think Cory Booker led with his humanity too, right? To use her phrase. So,
and his mama is Black.
Mm-hmm.
His mama is Black, and his mama is a Delta. Yeah. So, I didn't find, I was like, what's up with Cory? Right. I started doing research after that, right? And that's when I found out, he had introduced his mother at the Delta Sigma Theta, the Negro Church, Negro women's movement has been very important, to this country. So yeah, he led with his humanity, and he also, I think it deeply hurt him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it did. Yes.
Yeah. This is a question from the audience too. I'm going to keep my own questions at bay because that's not my role, is not to ask my own questions, but can you talk a little about your choice of Du Bois quotes, and Du Bois as the namesake of this novel, and how it relates to the stories that follow? How would you like us to understand them?
Well, the very first quote is about the sorrow songs. And I grew up not as much as my mother would have liked, because my father was an atheist, but I grew up in the church. But I went to a Black bourgeoisie church, an AME church, St. Joseph in Durham. But then there was Grandma's Church in Eatonton, Flat Rock Primitive Baptist. And so I sort of follow Primitive Baptist, but I don't name it Primitive Baptist because I didn't want to get caught out. And so I grew up with what we used to call the traditional Negro spirituals. Now we just call them the spirituals. And they lead me constantly. I have, poems based on traditional spirituals in my very first book. And so Dr. Du Bois really loved Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was a very complicated man, and he was a proto-feminist, but also he chased the ladies. He cheated on his wife. He cheated on his mistress, but he was this man that was passionate about Black people and gave his entire life to us. And so it's interesting about that question, because I don't think I've ever gotten that question in quite that form. What I had particular quotes, and then I would go back and change them according to what the particular section. And so every section that you see is directly connected, because I wanted Dr. Du Bois's words to provide a mirror for what was going on. I also wanted the historical portions to mirror the contemporary portions, because, as Faulkner has stated, the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. That became very clear to me in 2017 when the men with the tiki torches showed up in Charlottesville. Before then, I thought, hey, I'm just writing this book with a lot of history. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. And then scholarly friends of mine on January the 6th said, okay, I now have to start teaching again Charles Chestnut's Marrow of Tradition, right? Because this is I howled with fear and grief because I realized I was looking at a lynch mob. Mm-hmm. And so I thought about I thought that was the thing. Dr. Du Bois doesn't speak to me the way he speaks to me intellectually in certain ways. He doesn't speak to me the way that Miss Phyllis speaks to me, or Miss mm-hmm. Lucille continues to speak to me. But I thought about him because, we're talking about arcs of my book of my novel were due to go out. And I thought, oh my God, mm-hmm. this is really bizarre. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of the reasons. I mean, yes, every artist has an ego. I think that, sure, I think I did that, as the kids say, I think I wrote a good book, but I also think it really resonates with people because it's connecting to things, and these kids need to know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't have to be teaching the same lessons every 10 years. Mm-hmm. These kids need to really know how what's going on now, even the corruption that we're seeing very much connects with history. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'll agree that you did write a pretty good book, as you just said. Another question came in from the audience that, and going back to what you just said about the deltas and the importance of sororities, and I'll broaden the question a little bit. Martha Bailey asks if you can talk a bit more about the importance of the sororities, as well as the complicated social dynamic with them. And I would just bring that question also to the book itself. How, if you could talk a bit about the relations among women in this book and how women support each other, kind of I guess what we might call the feminist or womanist questions in this book.
What's the Black feminist book? Mm-hmm. And I was kind of scared to really say, this is a Black feminist book. This is written for dark brown skinned women like myself, dark brown skin, coily, kinky haired Black women. That was terrifying when I said that on CBS this morning, but I felt like if I didn't say it, it was going to get lost in the shuffle, because early people were asking me, why did I feel the need to write about Black women? And I thought that, no, we don't ask those questions. Professor Morrison told us don't ask those questions anymore, right? So I had been getting early before then those kind of questions. And Black women, I mean, you know, to say that we're the backbone of the Black community is both a cliche and the truth. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think about in the last election where you would have Black women and they would be organizing the voting, and there would be, you know, people getting chicken sandwiches and chicken wings and ribs and all of that to bring out the vote. My mother was a community organizer, as well as, you know, a college professor. She would take me to canvassing and to register Black folks to vote when I was a little bitty girl, when Jimmy Carter was, you know, and they would, and she would say, go on, baby, tell them who you voting for. And I would say, I'm voting for Jimmy Carter, you know. And so I grew up in a matrilineal, right? There's no such thing as matriarchal, right? But a matrilineal environment. I grew up among Black women who would not have called themselves feminists, but were very empowered. I'm the first generation of my family that would say I'm a Black feminist. It's very interesting because there were, you know, I won't say who it was, but a couple of people, it wasn't my age, and she was just like, you do you, who were like, why do we have this whole thing about Black colleges, right? And so I think that one of the things that sometimes, and hopefully my book will chart a path, people only want to hear about Black people when they're in all white spaces. We do not count when we're all together by ourselves. And even the notion of double consciousness, I didn't decide to say my book was about double consciousness because my characters don't think about white people until they come to do harm. This is a Black space. But I also was hoping that white readers would see a hardcore Black space. Particularly, not a lot has been written about the Black bourgeoisie and Black middle class people in all Black spaces. And I grew up sort of on the line. My mother was a working class, dark, very dark brown skin woman with full African features. My father came from mixed race people. You know, Black bourgeoisie, his family's papers are in the Moreland Spingarn collection at Howard University. His grandfather's the first Black football player at University of Nebraska. So there's all of that. And so in terms of Black women, the Black women's club movement, I wanted to show both the grimy side of sororities, right? That, you know, I'm not in a sorority, but I remember, you know, friends of mine who pledged, this was before the intake thing, you know, who pledged in the Southern District. But I also wanted to show how Black women come together. No spoilers, but there's a moment where these Black women in this sorority come together. This is what we do. I mean, even when we don't like each other, we will never say that in public. There are people I don't care for, you know, Black women, and nobody's ever going to know that because, you know, something happens, they shine, I shine. And that is the blessing of the horrible curse of slavery. We went on those ships, all kinds of different tribes. We came off a community. And we're still a community. And every time these white supremacists try to do something to us, I wish they would stop, because what they don't understand is that the more they come for us, the more we are like this. Black women were praying for Judge Brown Jackson. We were sending her. We were calling on the ancestors. We were praying. We were like, you will not take this from us. And then we were like, here it is, party, 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 right? So that's what happens when you oppress people. You just linked fate.
Yeah, wow. No, that's you said so much in that in that answer. I do have one question of my own, and then Tracy, I'll turn it over to you for our final question, if you don't mind. I think I mentioned in my introduction, Alice Walker's statement about the way you convey place and the way you create sense of place. And I was struck by your land acknowledgement at the beginning, which was very deep. I mean, which was much more than what sometimes can be a superficial acknowledgement. I mean, that was a deep acknowledgement. And I'm wondering if, I know you grew up in the South, but do you think that your placement now, you're in Oklahoma, you mentioned your grandfather was the first Black football player at University of Nebraska. You have a Midwestern experience too, which is not as represented in.
No, not really.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Right. So, I didn't really have, well, let me say this. My mother taught Alice Walker. Okay. So Eatonton, so Chicasetta is not a real town, but Eatonton, Georgia is. It's like a little bitty town, like 3,000 people, right? And my people are from Eatonton and Milledgeville. Putnam County is Muskogee land. It's Creek Muskogee land. And I identify as Afro-Indigenous, but I am not affiliated with any tribe. So I try to be very respectful. I try to respect my ancestors, but I also try not to intrude. So it was just a wonderful feeling when Indian Country Today, when I was interviewed for them, you know, after all this time of being out here, it was just an honor and a great privilege that I take very seriously. So again, I don't believe in any mistakes. And when I first came out here, and you know, I think Tracy may be familiar with my third book, Red Clay Sweet, and the landscape was just ugly, and I was like, "What's happening?" You know, but being out here among Indigenous peoples and being friends with Indigenous faculty members and being mentored by the great Gary Hobson, and having in particular a visioning Native American student say to me, if you do not honor your Indigenous ancestors, and I hadn't even told him I was Indigenous, he was like, this is going to be trouble. So having that and learning how to negotiate that while still identifying as African American, it's taken a long time to get there. In terms of my father's ancestors, we were too Black for them, right? They were very light-skinned people, and they didn't have anything to do. You know, my mother was a dark brown-skinned woman, and so therefore the only people I've ever really had a relationship with were my mother's people, working class Black people who also, but I have indigeneity on both sides. So I think coming out here, but no, not Midwestern, I remain hardcore Southern. I will never be anything but, you know, a deep Southerner. But I will say being out here on this land and learning the respect and the reverence for the people in the land I couldn't have written love songs without that.
Mhm, mhm. That's a fascinating perspective. Tracy, do you want to close thing? This has
Yeah. Oh, I wish we had more time, but you know, the Southern anchor that you carry and that I think lives in the book. I hear it in the beautiful voices that conjure for me my family through generations, the food, which does the same thing. So this question is one on my list when I'm thinking, okay, I'm running out of time. It's just nouns: love, food, voices, beauty, home. However you want to respond to those 5 nouns as the parting word, I think we'll kind of laugh it up.
Well, I think what I learned being out here is that medicine is not simply healing the physical body. When one has medicine, it brings the people together. And so love is medicine. As the great Louise Erdrich's first book of fiction, Love Medicine. Love is medicine, food is medicine, history is medicine. All these things bring the people together. One of my poems has a line that says, "These are the people's stories, their epic red clay." And so the story is about medicine, and it's about healing. And I don't know how to make us better, so I just offer what I can on the page, and I did my best.
Thank you.
We are so grateful for what you did. So thank you so much. I have to say, Professor Gates sends his regrets that he could not join us, but he will watch the recording and eat up every word, I know. So so thank you to our audience for joining. Thank you, Tracy, for being here. And what I will acknowledge that I have not made my way. I have not completed my journey with your book, but I am going
whenever you finish, it's right on time. That's what I tell people. It's right on time. It took me 1.5 years, so don't be trying to rush.
It took you a while to write it, so it can take a while to read. But I also feel like now that I have your voice in my head, like how much richer an experience this already rich experience was. So thank you so much. Good luck with your future work. And we will see you back at Harvard, I believe, on April 29th, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you so much and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Yeah.